Okay, today I'm here in my 1901 barn, and we're going to go to John chapter 11, and we're going to resume there where we left off. This is letter B, capital letter B, revelation of Lazarus' resurrection. Revelation of Lazarus' resurrection. By the time Jesus comes to Bethany, and we had talked about Bethany, by the time he comes to Bethany, 5 miles outside of Jerusalem, Lazarus had been in the grave for 4 days. Now the Jews at this time believed that after 3 days, a soul, during 3 days, a soul who had died would stay around the tomb. In other words, they believed that the soul would stay for a little while around the tomb for 3 days. Well, that didn't happen because in the Bible it says to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. Now, it's only talking about Christians. Now, are you a Christian? Do you believe in Jesus? Well, I hope so. Let's go to John chapter 11. And this is what Jesus said to Martha. Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die." Do you believe this? Now we're going to come back to that. But you see, belief in Jesus Christ is what Jesus was saying. That is what you must do in order to have this resurrection. Now we're going to talk about resurrection and how it related to Lazarus. Now if you remember, there were 3 people in this story. Lazarus, Mary, his sister, and his other sister, Martha. And don't confuse this Mary with Jesus' mother. No, this was not Jesus' mother. This was a different Mary. This was a younger woman. This was the sister of Lazarus that we're talking about. So Jesus, he finally arrives at Bethany where Lazarus, Martha, and Mary were. Mary of Bethany, that is. All right, well, so they had this belief that if a soul would stay around for 3 days, then after the 4th day, then the soul could go to heaven. Now, the Jews mostly taught that Jewish people would all go to heaven. Why? Because they were God's chosen people. Well, they had to believe in Jesus too. See, they weren't exempt from that. Anybody who wants to get to heaven must do what Jesus says. They must believe in me. That's what Jesus said. They said that anybody who wants to get to heaven, this is what Jesus said, anybody who wants to get to heaven must believe in me. Jesus was talking about himself. All right? Well, and so here Jesus comes to the tomb of Lazarus. They thought that there was no hope. That Lazarus could get better or anything like that. that's what they were hoping for, that Lazarus would get better and that he didn't really die, he just passed out. Well, we got to think about this. When Jesus was there, Jesus had already arrived at the tomb. And Jesus was there with several other people. Now let's look at that. Let's look at that. In verse 14, Jesus told them plainly, these are his disciples. Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus has died. All right. Verse 17. Now when Jesus came, he found that Lazarus had already been put in the tomb 4 days. There we are. That's what I was talking about. Lazarus had been in the grave for 4 days. Now a body, typically, what happens is that the blood coagulates. In other words, it becomes like a scab. All the blood in the body, when the body is dead, it becomes coagulated. This is what causes blood clots, by the way. Another thing about a body is that the body has rigor mortis. Have you ever heard of that? Rigor mortis? Rigor mortis is where the body becomes really stiff. Another thing about a dead body is that the dead body has gangrene on it. Now, gangrene is not green. It makes the body black and makes especially certain parts of the body black. This is possibly caused by hemorrhaging because the bodily processes have been disrupted. And another thing is that the body starts to smell. Martha brought this out later. So Jesus is there. Now, Bethany, it says in verse 18, Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off. So it was near Jerusalem. Many of the Jews had come to Mary and Martha, Martha and Mary, I should say, to console them concerning their brother. So they wanted to comfort Martha and Mary, who were the ones left. Lazarus had died. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, this is verse 20, she went and met him, but Mary remained seated in the house. So Martha goes and meets Jesus somewhere outside of the city of where they were at, Bethany. Mary, that was Lazarus' sister, she stays in the house, overcome with grief. Maybe she didn't feel like meeting anyone. Verse 21. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Now, Martha sort of scolds Jesus. She doesn't believe that Jesus made the right decision. Because what happened was Lazarus died. A messenger goes from Mary and Martha to meet Jesus. Jesus was a good way off. They tell Jesus that Lazarus is sick. Possibly the messenger did not know that Lazarus had died. Possibly as soon as the messenger left the house, Lazarus passed away. Well, Jesus knew, because Jesus knew all things. But Jesus does an unusual thing. He stays 2 days in the place where he was afar off. Now, usually, if you hear that someone is sick, ready to die, that you would want to go and be with that person. Jesus was a friend of Lazarus. So Martha scolds Jesus for not being there. Jesus stayed 2 days where he was at. It took another day to travel to Bethany, because remember, Jesus was a long ways off, at least a day's journey. Verse 22, but even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. That's what what Martha says to Jesus. Well, we go back to the tomb. All these Jews followed Mary, the sister of Lazarus. All of them follow Mary, the sister of Lazarus. They think that she's going to the tomb. But no, secretly, Martha had told Mary that Jesus wanted to see her. Mary leaves the house, her house. She arrives there where Jesus was at. And all these Jews meet Jesus because they follow Mary. They know that Martha's there with Jesus too. And so all of these people are ready to go to the tomb. You see how that God planned this for all of the Jews to follow Mary and Martha, the two sisters, and all of this crowd, they decide to go to the tomb. That's where Jesus wants them to go. Because Jesus is going to perform a miracle. You see how it was God's plan? And that Jesus had planned all this ahead of time in eternity past? Verse 23. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Well, Mary was the one who was possibly younger than Martha, and she was the one who had washed Jesus' feet. We see this in chapter 11, that Martha was more outspoken. We see this in chapter 11, verse 21. Chapter 11, verse 21. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. See, Martha speaks up. Mary was the quiet one. She was the person who was in the background. Not very outspoken, but Martha was outspoken. She was the kind of lady that if in a crowd, she would be speaking up first. Well, Martha did not have much faith. She says, rebukes Jesus, if you had been here, Jesus, before Lazarus died, he wouldn't have died. She knew that Jesus was a miracle-working God. She knew that Jesus was God. And she's going to say something along those lines a little bit later. Well, here we are with Martha again. Martha, yes, she wavered in her faith at times. But possibly Martha still held out hope. Because here was the miracle-working God with her. Chapter 11, verse 22. Maybe I read this, but I'll read it again. Chapter 11, verse 22 of John. But even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. She strengthens her faith. You know, this is how oftentimes a Christian is, isn't it? We waver back and forth. we can't make up a decision. Well, Jesus understood. Because she says, Martha says, whatever you ask from God, He will give it to you. Maybe she just had a hint of hope. Well, oftentimes it's when we let the matter up to God that God can work, you see. You see, if you have a problem, if there are people that you can't get along with, maybe you should just have a little bit of hope, like Mary and Martha. We see later that Mary also rebuked Jesus. Both of them had lost their faith. They were, so depressed and so disturbed by this death. It was just tearing at their hearts. This was their brother that died. The guy that was raised with them as children. Well, why don't you and I stop trying to make it work ourselves? And why don't we just do what Martha had contemplated? Just give it to the Lord to handle. Problems are going to come. Jobs are going to be lost. Relationships are going to be busted up. People are going to die. Babies are going to get sick. Mothers and fathers are going to get sick. Brothers and sisters are going to get sick. It's all inevitable. Cancer comes. Heart disease. Hepatitis. And all those other things I don't understand too much about. I'm no medical doctor. But I do know that sickness happens, and it's a tragedy. This is why couples say that they promise to stick to one another in sickness and in health. Well, Martha may have realized that the Son of God could do whatever He wanted. And Martha's faith still wavered. Chapter 11, verse 39. Here's Martha again. Chapter 11, verse 39. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Well, Lazarus was in the tomb. Jesus says, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to Him, "Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he has been dead 4 days." You see how she wavered again? He's been in the grave for 4 days. He stinks. The body is going to stink. There's going to be an odor. Well, Jesus' faith was just the opposite of Martha's. Jesus kept insisting that everyone's focus of the whole situation was on worldly considerations. Let's see what Jesus says to this crowd that had gathered. Chapter 11, verse 23. Chapter 11, 23. Jesus answered them, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified." You see, He was full of hope. He was constantly reinforcing hope, goodness, just a little bit of faith. He wanted to increase their faith. Martha thought Jesus was talking about the resurrection of our body. Someday you're going to die, probably, unless the rapture takes place. Well, there's going to be a resurrection of your body. Chapter 11, verse 24. Chapter 11, verse 24. This is what Jesus says. "Truly, truly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. He's trying to give them just a grain of hope. He's telling them that a body that dies is like a grain of wheat. A grain of wheat must be put into the ground first before it can then grow. Martha realized that Jesus was really asking what Jesus was really asking and went beyond Jesus' question. She goes beyond his question. And Martha responds to Jesus. Chapter 11, verse 27. Martha's response to Jesus is classic. Chapter 11, verse 27. Chapter 11, verse 27. She said to him, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world." You see, what I had said earlier, when Jesus says, "Everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die." Do you believe this? She said to him, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who's coming into the world." When Martha says, "I believe that you are the Christ," she used the perfect tense. Now you see, there is the past tense in Greek, there is the future tense, and there is the present tense. We have those in English, yes. But you see, in Greek, a word can also convey the perfect tense. We have this in English too. But she is saying that I believed in the past, but it has a present consequence. And it also shows that she is certain. A past event happened that has the present consequence. And that's the kind of belief that she had in the past. She believed in Jesus. You see, Jesus was friends with this family. Let's go on here. In verse 27, what does the word Christ mean? Because she said to him, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ." Well, the word Christ is the Greek word for Messiah. The Greek word relates to the Hebrew word. It's a translation of the Hebrew word. The Hebrew word is Mashiach. Mashiach. And it means Messiah. You see, in the Old Testament, Daniel chapter 9, if you want to write this down and look it up, Daniel chapter 9, verse 25, in some translations you will find the word Messiah. Now, the translation that I have, the ESV, it's translated anointed one. And that is what the word Messiah means. But she says, I believe that you are the Messiah. The Messiah was the one in the Old Testament that was promised in Daniel chapter 9, verse 25. And when Jesus came, he fulfilled partly Daniel 9:25. He showed that he was the Messiah. Jesus is the Messiah. We should put our faith and trust in him. Well, it means Messiah, the word Christ. And we can have eternal life right now. Chapter 11, verse 26. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. You see, that's the hope that we have. We shall never die. We won't die like the heathen. The heathen are all unbelievers, and they do not have to look a certain way. A heathen person is just simply an unbeliever. It is not someone who is out somewhere in the sticks and wears very little clothing. That is not a heathen. A heathen is someone who is an unbeliever. Well, when it says in the King James that he was groaning within himself, it means in Greek that he was moved because of the people's sorrow and sickness that death brought. Let's look at chapter 11, verses 33 and 38. Chapter 11, verses 33 and 38. And we aren't going to have time to do much more here. Chapter 11, verse 33. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. Well, what does it mean that he was greatly troubled? It is the Greek word embrimaomai. Embrimaomai. And it means that he was overcome with sorrow because he felt the people's sorrow. Well, we're going to come back to John chapter 11 a little bit later.